Hello class, this is your instructor Sean Novick again. We're continuing our discussion on communication, but what I want to do today is talk about the four subsystems of language. And what these subsystems do is they actually provide an overarching structure for us to understand languages in general. An easy way to remember these four subsystems is PMSS. That stands for P, phonology, M, morphology. The first S is syntax, and the second S is semantics. Now those four subsystems provide us an overarching framework, if you will, to understanding the structure of language. It helps us understand the structure, but also the content of different languages, right? Which is fundamentally called structural linguistics. So in structural linguistics, or also called descriptive linguistics, they really socially decontextualize language. Meaning they're not really worried with the social context of language. They're just thinking about structurally how languages are structured and how they function. Now, like I said, in this particular kind of study, they might focus on phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. So let's talk about phonology first. Phonology is essentially a anthropological way of describing the word for system of sounds. Now those total set of sounds within a language are called phones. Like hello, phones. And you might actually be surprised to know that most languages use a very small amount of phones. Now with those phones, they might be a different set from language to language and be a variety of different system of sounds within that language. But here's the interesting thing. Biologically speaking, humans have the capacity to make all of the sounds of every language in the world that humans speak. Now, as a phone is the set of sounds, or a sound in a human language, a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound. Take this for example. In standard spoken American English, right, which is what the dominant culture in the United States calls proper English. But the truth is that that is the form of English that the American middle class and above speak. There's really nothing quote-unquote proper about it other than it has been set as the standard. It's relative though. But in standard spoken American English, think about two words, then, like TH, and den, D-E-N. That D and the TH, the th and the D, those are phonemes. And simply switching those out, we change the meaning of the word. But in and of themselves, those phonemes are the most simplest unit of sound in language. But that wouldn't be the case in all languages. Let's take Spanish, for example. That D and the TH, the D and the th, are called allophones in Spanish. So why is that? Changing those out in Spanish doesn't distinguish the words from one another. It just changes the context of the words. Here's what's strange. You would maybe think there would be more, but actually most of the world's languages only have 20 to 40 phonemes. Now there are some that have, for example, just over 10, right? But there's also others that have, 120 or so phonemes. But still, those are polar differences that are kind of anomalies. Most languages have 20 to 40. And actually they have a kind of a system of writing that's put together that records all of the phones of every language of the world. And that's called the International Phonetic Alphabet, the IPA. Now that's just the sound component of language. Now there's also morphology. So what's morphology? You can kind of get the root word there. All languages have systems of morphing sounds together to create words. That's morphology. They bring sounds together and morph them. Now when it comes to sound, just as a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound in languages, a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in languages. When I say morpheme, I mean morpheme. The commonality is the eme at the end. And that's compared of the phoneme, right? The phoneme, the eme. When you think of that, that's smallest unit. An example of a morpheme in the English language is the letter S, because alone it has meaning. It means plural, right? Now, some morphemes can be used in and of themselves, but if they can't and they have to be attached to a word, those are called bound morphemes. They're called bound morphemes because they're a morpheme that needs to be bound to a word in order to have meaning. And a morpheme that does not need to be attached to a word is called a free morpheme. Now, a word is the smallest component of a sentence, and it retains its meaning separate of the sentence. So we can take different phones, we morph them together, and we create these words, right, that go with other words to create sentences. Now, it's important to understand that the rules used to combine morphemes across languages, it can be quite complex. They're not all the same across the board. So although morphology exists in all human languages, that they're not the same, and it's the language that decides the rules. Now, the third subsystem in understanding the structure of language is syntax, syntax. So this provides us with a system of rules for combining words within a sentence. And not just to make a sentence, but to make a meaningful sentence. So in some languages, like English for example, the order of words is very important because it conveys meaning and how it's ordered. English language, just like all languages, have what's called a word class of nouns. However, different languages have different subclasses of nouns. In linguistic anthropology, this is most usually referred to as genders. It's important to remember that gender in this context has nothing to do with sex roles, for example, right? It's a different kind of gender. But overall, what's important about syntax is that actually applying the rules to grammar will turn what would otherwise be meaningless sets of words into combinations of words that actually have meaning, that we understand, that we can transmit culture and communicate things to influence one organism to another. Now, the fourth component or the fourth subsystem in languages is called semantics. And this is simply a system of relating words to meaning. Now, the total stock or the total compilation of words within a language is called a lexicon. Anthropologists can actually study cultures by analyzing the lexicon of those cultures. Because typically a lexicon consists of words that describe objects and ideas that are important to that culture, so you can analyze the culture through that way. We can get an idea of how a culture understands and makes sense of its physical and cultural environment by taking a look at the lexicon within it. And when we're analyzing the lexicon of a culture, it can help us understand how they classify different things. So breaking that down can actually help us understand the culture. Consider this difference, for example. Think of a brother-in-law. Think about a brother-in-law within the English language, right? It could be your sister's husband. It could be your spouse's brother. It could even be your spouse's sister's husband can be your brother-in-law. But we don't have necessarily a way that we describe them in different ways, right? There's no status differential between those different kind of brother-in-laws to us. But let's compare that in Hindi language, right? What is a brother-in-law? How do they describe a brother-in-law? First of all, what they call a brother-in-law is really, it depends on whether or not the speaker is male or female. For example, for a female speaker, there is a difference for what the female speaker would refer to her sister's husband There's a different word used for the husband's elder brother. There's a different word used for the husband's younger brother. And there's a different word used for one of the husband's sister's husband. And part of the reason why is it has a lot to do with different statuses that are attributed to those to those different family members that intersects with sex and with age. Anyway, that's what all we're going to talk about today. So we talked about phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. And those are the 4 subsystems of language. And we'll pick up and we'll continue on communication a little bit more because I want to talk to you about language and stratification. But for the time being, that's it. So I guess I'll see you at the next lesson. Take care.